Hello, Kate.
Hello.
I understand that you work in philosophical counseling, and that one thing that you sometimes do in your philosophical counseling work is you incorporate ideas, you use ideas that are from the philosophical literature. So I wonder if you could share with us an example of how you use these ideas in the counseling.
Well, for example, at one time when I was speaking to a client about his situation, he was struggling with having a brain tumor. And this meant that he had to drop out of college. And he was severely limited in terms of transportation and things that he could do, and also his attention span. He was a very intellectually active man and spent a lot of time in the library reading, and he actually discovered some philosophical sources that I was able to expand upon with him and appreciate. At one point, he was reading a book by a woman who had written about military life and how important Stoicism was in military life. And he was very excited then to learn more about Stoicism and how that could apply to his condition. And so that was wonderful for me because I was able to talk to him much more about the key tenet of Stoicism, which is to control what you can control and let go of what you cannot control.
Did you use a particular philosopher?
Well, the typical text is Epictetus, but I find with clients, especially in his case, he was reading some good, sophisticated secondary sources. So, I pointed him to Epictetus, but who was well interpreted by this other author. So we were able to discuss, the simple meaning of his words. And it was I think he said he found it very helpful because part of it was, would he ever be able to achieve his goals in life? And one of the primary life lessons offered by Stoicism, as understood by Epictetus, is, it may be more important, given the range of control that you have over your life, it may be more important to focus on what gives you pleasure and gives you a kind of happiness in the present moment. And that, you might arrive at that after analyzing the limitations and constraints that are put on your life. Another philosophical idea that was extremely helpful to him was the notion of self-overcoming. And that's a Nietzschean notion. The reason that was helpful is that, his biggest obstacles in life, actually, it was easier for him to conceive of them as being in terms of his own limitations that he needed to overcome. He shared with me one day a great deal of frustration that he had. He had gone to a support group that was designed to support people who had brain tumor related symptoms. And he was very angry about the group because he felt that the group had shared too much in terms of experiences of self-pity or self-victimization. And he and I obviously talked quite a bit about his perceptions of that. But the bottom line was that he did not want to see himself as someone who was limited by or pitiable because his life had changed so drastically.
But rather somebody who overcomes his situation.
But rather someone who overcomes his situation and even overcomes his own internal problems. For example, the problem of focusing. Well, then with this philosophical idea as a framework, we could begin to say, well, what are some ways in which you can overcome your tendency to become distracted?
let's take a step back, and if you could explain briefly the idea of that you use. First of all, let's start with the Stoic idea that you used.
Yes.
So what is it about Stoicism that you used? What is the idea that you used?
The idea behind that Stoicism is so powerful for is to meditate and reflect on the areas of one's life, the specific areas of one's life that you do have control over, that you are able to improve upon or change or exert creative force on, and to learn through analysis to separate that part of your life and that part of who you are from things in your life that you don't have. No matter how much force you exert in terms of your will or in terms of your creativity or energy, that are outside of your control.
So this is an important distinction for the Stoics between what is in my control and what is not in my control.
It is a very, very important distinction. I think, he and I discussed it was the key distinction in order to use it fruitfully for him.
And for the Stoics, for the Stoics that you used, what is the attitude that one should adopt towards the things that are not in my control?
Well, he was struggling with his emotional attachment to, for example, physical autonomy and physical freedom. In his youth, before the disease, he had been very an athlete. He was a young man who had challenged himself athletically as well as intellectually, and so just telling him, that you should be emotionally detached now from your athleticism would not have been effective. So the point of a Stoic analysis of what's in your control and what's out of your control is that you can actually induce within yourself more detachment with respect to those things that are outside of your control. And we talked extensively about shifting focus, that within a blink of an eye, one can understand through contemplation one's limitations, and within a blink of an eye, shift focus toward one's power. And so it was needed to use Nietzsche and the notion of self-overcoming and affirmation.
Okay. So before we move to Nietzsche,
yes.
I can hear from you the following major concepts that you used in the Stoic world. One is the distinction between what is under my control
yes.
and not under my control. Another is emotional detachment
yes.
versus
trying to induce that emotional detachment.
And a third one is the focus, that
yes.
you can focus on different aspects of life.
Correct. And that it's possible, the Stoic tradition emphasizes reflection and meditation on what one can do, not simply what one can't do,
right.
but also on what one can do.
Right.
And it's not so hard to focus on what one can do, or this is what we talked about, that all this agony and sadness and all the emotionally attached focus that we have on our limitations just wastes energy for
right.
the energy one can put toward things that we are able to change.
Right. So would you say that that the conversation combined somehow elements from philosophical ideas and elements from his personal biography?
Absolutely. And also followed his own, because he really was a very creative person. He is a very creative person. So he things became constructive between the two of us when I finally understood that he could lead these sessions.
Uh-huh.
And so I would give him ideas, and I would say, I realized, he spent plenty of time at the library. And I would say, why don't you go look this up and let me know what you think next time we meet? Well, this seems interesting to you. Why don't you, when we come back, why don't you begin the session for us? Once he realized he would be leading the sessions, it was very productive. He retained his interest in Nietzsche and Stoicism. So one of the productive moments for our sessions was when it came together where his understanding of his situation was, it would be counterproductive for him to set long-term goals. And that, as a matter of fact, his efforts to set long-term goals was part of what was getting him down. Because the nature of the disease he was dealing with, not because of impending mortality, which actually he had a benign tumor, he explained, but because it was debilitating him from setting long-term goals. So we talked about the notion of affirmation of the present, control over what we have control over, the way in which one's experience of one's life can deepen in the present, rather than to have a horizontal movement towards some kind of linear future. We discussed those models of time, and he handled that very well. And it fit with Stoicism and the Nietzsche's notion of the eternal return of the same, where we just focused on affirmation of the present. And it relieved him. And so he told me he felt relieved of many of his preoccupations, and he felt ready to get on with his life, to focus on the deep present. And we did things together too, which I think it was a matter of being active. And he's a bit of a networker in Ann Arbor, so we had fun. We formed a Socrates Cafe. For a while, the two of us led a Socrates Cafe, and he had a lot of fun helping me organize that, and vice versa. And I think that it made him feel acknowledged as a person who was living life.
Good. Very interesting. Thank you, Kate.
Yes.